This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Well, Happy New Year. I hope your 2024 has got off to a great start. This obviously is the first podcast episode of 2024, and the topic that we're going to be looking at is success. And I'm hoping that this podcast interview with entrepreneurial figure Sandro Forte is going to really help to inspire you to focus on the right things come 2024, to write your goals down and then to commit to them and to keep your promises. I really hope you go on to enjoy this episode. Hi Sandro, it's lovely to meet you. Would you be able to share with the listeners a little bit about your background and also your view of what success is?
Hi David, yeah, of course. Thank you first of all for having me on your podcast. I'm very honoured to be with you today. I am by no means extraordinary. I have a very humble beginnings in life. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. I have a day job. But I think I probably wear 5 hats, really. The first one is I run a wealth management business. I did not wake up when I was 14 years old and think, wow, I really want to be a financial advisor. There are reasons for getting into that business. The primary reason actually was that I needed to pay off a student overdraft. But I learned very quickly that there are, on the other side of challenges in life, there's an opportunity. So I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. I ran a podcast for 3 years. I'm not nearly as tenacious as you. So there came a point where I thought I can't do any more. But I did 210 and I met some extraordinary people with some amazing stories. I've written a book which is sold over 500,000 copies, published in 8 languages. I'm told it's very good for draft exclusion and keeping wobbly tables straight. But all joking apart, it is a book on building success in one's life. And we'll talk about that as well. I do a lot of philanthropic work. I've raised £24 million plus for charities around the world, which I'm very proud of. I always believe that we should all try and give something back. Most of us are in very fortunate positions in life. And then as a result of, I guess, the success of my business, I was asked to do quite a lot of speaking, and that became a professional vocation, if you like. I've traveled to 88 countries and addressed audiences from kind of one end of the world to the other. To your question, what is success? That's a really difficult one, because I think the first thing I would say, David, is that success is definitely relative. Success can be something as simple as setting a goal and achieving an outcome, this weekend, spending that extra hour with your kids that you've been meaning to do for a while and haven't got around to doing. I don't necessarily think success is about achieving something extraordinary. Sometimes the vast majority of people I've met, and I guess the analogy that I would use is that they spend most of their life setting goals, deciding on all the things they're going to do, and then they get to a point in their life, usually when they're too old to do it, and they look back over their shoulder and they ask themselves this really important question: if only I had ... And I think the ... is different things to different people. Lots of stories from my podcast of people who left school without any qualifications, had some kind of physical or mental challenge, but still went on to do some amazing things. So I think probably in summary, success is about the achievement of an outcome. It's about putting into some kind of positive action that which you think about. And I think for me, the big challenge for most of us as human beings is most of us have a desire. We have a goal, an objective, call it what you will. And then there's a point in the future at which we hope to achieve that goal. The big problem for most of us is that there is a gap in the middle, and it's called life. Stuff gets in the way. The little voice on your shoulder gives you 1,000 reasons every day why you shouldn't do it, because it makes you feel comfortable when you blame somebody else rather than actually take on the challenge. So a long-winded answer to your first question, but I think success is definitely relative. It doesn't have to be this extraordinary amazing outcome that everyone else looks at and thinks, wow, how did they do that? For some people, success is about getting to the next day. Certainly in my experience of people I've spoken to. So yeah, success is different things to different people, I would say.
Yeah, and most definitely to some, I suppose success is health, isn't it? To some, it's performance. Um, yeah, in terms of you talked about the voice on your shoulder there. So, yeah, do you want to elaborate on that and how the voice on your shoulder helps and maybe hinders you on occasions?
Well, I think I love talking about little voice because we've all got one of those. And I guess probably the best thing to do is to take listeners back to the time when they were, I don't know, 12, 18 months old. And of course, as we know, you talk about this a lot. In the first sort of 7, 8 years of our life, we didn't have the little voice. There was no external influence. People telling us why we shouldn't do something. Smart goals. I've heard smart goals talked about, forever. And for me, smart goals don't fundamentally work because to be a smart goal, it has to be realistic somewhere along the line. And I remember when I was 8 years old, I don't know whether it was my mother or a school teacher. Perhaps I shouldn't credit my own mother with this, but definitely somebody, an adult member of the community, asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And one could argue I've never quite grown up, 55, but still a kid. And somebody said to me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said something like, and I did genuinely want to be a heart surgeon. I was really fascinated by medicine. And I wanted, to achieve this lofty goal of being a specialist in my field. And I remember getting this kind of condescending pat on the head. And the adult said, "Oh, you might want to redefine your thoughts. You might want to think again. That seems a bit overly ambitious." And so one of the things that I've learned in my life, actually, before I answer the question in detail, is that people fail in life not because they aim too high and miss. People fail in life because they aim too low and hit. That's the reality, unfortunately, for most people. And so when we are young, 12, 18 months old, we would look at another human being, typically our parents, and up until that point, we'd shuffled around on our bottoms or we'd crawled on our stomachs, and we saw someone else performing an action that we thought instinctively was much more effective than the way we were doing it before. So in our tiny minds, we would say, I want to try that because it seems more effective than the way I was doing it. Same with driving a car, swimming, riding a bicycle, learning to talk, all these other things. And so, what we would be shown by our parents is by putting one foot in front of another, maintaining some balance, and repeating that process over and over again. Because as we know, we failed dismally the first 500 times we tried it. But because there was no little voice, there was no filter, there was no reason not to go again. And because there was no little voice, there was no feeling of comfort around failure. And so consequently, we just repeated the process over and over again until we got it right. And if you look at high performing athletes, if you look at people in business, they are not, with great respect, built in a different way. They don't have a different set of backgrounds. They don't have different education. What they have is the ability to create this discipline around repetition, the repetition of something over and over and over again until they become expert at it. Tiger Woods, 1,000 hours of hitting balls, it's not because he's built in a different way. So for me, the little voice is something that we develop over time because we are surrounded by what I call members of the discouragement club. And the discouragement club is this unique group of individuals that we see in all walks of life, in the corner of the office, in the playground, in any other kind of environment. And these are the people who are built to complain about everything that's going on in the world because it makes them feel better if they can blame their manager, their colleague, their parents, their siblings, their best friend who let them down, instead of taking a good long hard look at themselves and asking themselves, what things can we control? The answer is, pretty much everything. So that for me is the distinction between the little voice that we didn't have when we were younger, no filter, and this ability to just do things without really questioning them, and this process that we go through with the help of the little voice, that constant noise in our ear that tells us, we can't build relationships with people on Zoom. We can't, talk about investments when the economy is bad. And all the other things that we have all made excuses about over the last few years in particular. That's the little voice that I'm talking about.
So, in some respects, what you're looking at there is failure, isn't it? And our view of failure and how that can really shape our behaviors, and then the conversations that we have about failure as well.
Yeah, and I know because of all the things that you talk about, given your own skill set, and you're far more qualified than I am to talk about this. But if we look at, and I share this with people, and it really, I think this is probably the one thing that resonates with people more than anything else. It's the one thing that helps them, I think, transition from a place to another one, wherever they happen to be right now, to the place they want to get to, and avoiding all that kind of interference in the middle. And it's a very basic premise. And the premise is that we should stop focusing on outcomes, because when you focus on an outcome, in the sales environment, if you make a sale, you're successful. If you don't make a sale, you're a failure. If you come second in a race, you're a failure. If you win, if you come first, you're a success. The problem is when you focus on the outcome, the definition of success and failure is very stark. It's black or white. On the other hand, if you focus on the process, so going through, good preparation, being the very best you can be, communicating effectively with a new client or prospect, whatever it is that you do 24/7, focus on putting one foot in front of another, because that's what you did when you were 12, 18 months old. You didn't worry about anything else. It was just about one foot in front of another, maintaining some balance. And the outcome always takes care of itself if you deal with the process. Too many people want to get to the outcome before they go through that process. So my basic message here is, if you stick to the process, be the very best version of yourself you can be, the outcome will always, by definition, take care of itself.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree. It's such a big challenge for so many people. And I suppose what the outcome focus does, it drives people to then really harness their inner critic, doesn't it? Where they become very, very self-critical and very down on themselves. It impacts their confidence, their motivation, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a great believer that you can learn, again, going back to your very first question, what is success? But whether it's, one of the things you're going to do this weekend, whether it's, this big, lofty, fairly unrealistic goal. And by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with unrealistic goals. I was part of a fundraising team for a charity a number of years ago, and they have a 24-hour fundraising day once a year. And the organizers said to me, "Okay, you're leading the team this year. What's the goal going to be?" And I said 250,000. And they said, "Oh, no, wait a minute. It can't be 250,000." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Because we've never raised more than 130,000 before in a day." And I said, "Well, okay, we might not get to 250,000. So it might be unrealistic to the majority of people, but we're going to set that goal, because one thing I know about setting the bar pretty high is that even if you don't quite get there, you're more likely to have achieved a better outcome than if you set the bar really low." And what was really interesting, David, was that by hour 23, we'd raised 252,000. And in the last hour, we raised almost nothing, because everyone had kind of got to their glass ceiling, and it was a psychological thing where, okay, we've achieved the goal now. So my point here is that sometimes setting the bar quite high, making those goals a little bit unrealistic, not all of them, because that's demotivational, but absolutely having a few unrealistic goals. I've got plenty of goals that I will never achieve, but they manifest themselves as a discipline in lots of other areas. And I'm a true believer that you can learn to be successful, because you learn to walk, talk, swim, ride a bicycle, drive a car. You do all those things subconsciously now, and you can do pretty much anything else subconsciously. And I have a particular technique that I use that kind of helps me to go on that kind of journey from where I am now to where I want to get to.
Let's go back to unrealistic goals, because I really like what you're talking about there. A lot of people with unrealistic goals, I suppose that it's like dreams, isn't it? Essentially, where they dream the dream, but then they maybe get overwhelmed and they're not sure how they're going to get there. So, what does your process look like, or what did that process look like? Certainly, when you talk about the charity work.
So two things really. I think that I have a little technique which, if we have time, I'll share it with you briefly. Basically, and I know lots of different people, particularly in the world that you live in and work in, and you have expertise in, David. For me, it's a very simple process. And what I do is I take goals. I get very frustrated not just at myself, but with lots of other people who write down this big long list of goals at the start of the year. We call them New Year's resolutions. And then at the end of the year, we look at the list and the good old little voice examines that list. We realize we haven't achieved anything on that list, but the little voice says, don't worry, David, there's always next year. And you just kick the can down the road, because one of the functions of the little voice is to keep us safe and keep us comfortable. And if we can blame everybody else as to why we haven't achieved those goals, that's okay. We just move everything on to the next year. So I'll give you an example. I write down my goals, but I do it in a very different way, because one of the things that we know is that the subconscious part of our brain, the unconscious part of our brain, is infinitely more powerful, definitely massively underused. And in the same way that we've learned all these other unconscious things that we now repeat 1,000 times a day without thinking, I take my goals and I apply the same process. So what I do is, I don't mind sharing this with you. It's a personal goal, but it's a good illustrator of the point, I think. So I write down my goals, every one of my 20 to 30 goals. 20 to 30 is the optimum number. Too few and it's not very meaningful. Too many and it becomes quite overwhelming. So 20 to 30 is the optimum number. And just a caveat, for anyone listening who's going, I don't have 20 to 30 goals. Going back to what I said earlier, we all have many, many goals, certainly more than 20 or 30. If we break our life down into lots of areas, spiritual, physical, family, business, and just think of 4 or 5 goals, they can be very short-term goals, they can be long-term goals, they can be unrealistic, they can be realistic, they can be, any kind of goal, but you mix them up. And then what I do is I write down each goal on a separate piece of card, typically a blank postcard. And the goal takes 2 forms, 2 rules, if you like. One is I write it as if the goal has already happened. So it's a subconscious affirmation, because one thing that we know is the subconscious part of our brain does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined, as you know. So the affirmation, if you like, doesn't say I will achieve, because too much of your conscious brain gets in the way. The little voice gives you reasons not to do it. By stating it as if it's already happened, you put that information into your subconscious, and then the emotional attachment to the goal comes in the form of describing how you felt when you achieved that goal. Now, logically, what I've just said makes no sense, of course, because the goal hasn't happened yet. But as I said, your subconscious doesn't distinguish between the two. And by reading these goals every day, typically I keep these 20 to 30 cards by my bed. I read them before I go to sleep. I don't study them. I don't learn them, don't dwell on them. I just read them like chapters or pages or paragraphs of a book. And then I put them down and repeat the process. I have found within about 30 days, I think differently, speak differently. People migrate towards me. Those days that we all have where everything seems to go wrong and it doesn't matter what we say to people, everyone says no to us, versus the days where everything seems to be going well and everyone says yes to us. That definitely has an impact. So this technique, and I'll give you one example. So I wrote down on one of my cards many years ago. I've never achieved it because it's pretty unrealistic, but it basically says, appearing on the front cover of Men's Health magazine was testament to my dietary and training disciplines. I look and feel amazing, right? Now, there's nothing realistic about that goal, because I'm not going to appear on the front cover of Men's Health magazine, unless, of course, the editor is listening and just wants to offer me the opportunity for a laugh. But the point I'm making here is that my goal here isn't necessary to appear on the front cover of Men's Health magazine, because subconsciously, I have a gym at home. I have a virtual trainer. There are days when, if I'm traveling, I have a home in Italy. There was a day back in February. It was freezing cold. Every conscious thought in my body said, I want to stay in bed. I do not want to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's half dark. Okay, I can easily text an excuse to my personal trainer, and I won't train today. And that's what I would have done consciously in any other situation, any previous part of my life. But subconsciously, it's become such a part of me, such a habit, if you like, for me to get up every morning, almost like it's like an outer body experience. So consciously, I didn't want to do it, but subconsciously, I did it anyway. And that's the difference for me, David, between the haves and the have-nots. The ones that can, discipline and regret. I talk about those 2 words a lot. Which of those 2 words, discipline and regret, is painful? Well, the answer is both. but here's a guarantee that I can make with certainty. If you don't have the first one in life, you're always going to get the second one by definition. So, so yeah, we could talk about all this all day, but that's a really good technique to train your subconscious mind to basically drive your, your ambition, your goal, the actions you need to take. Because if you leave it to your conscious mind, discouragement club, life gets in the way, the little voice gives you 10 reasons a day why you shouldn't do something. So that is a really useful technique which I teach a lot of people, and it works every time.
I can imagine what you're doing there as well is you're visualizing, I suppose, what success is like, isn't it? And you're visualizing the process as you go because you've actually written down these goals in the first place. So yeah, really, really helpful tip. So obviously you're a entrepreneurial guy, really. As you say, you've got five hats on there. What would your definition of mental toughness be as an entrepreneur?
Um, that's kind of me. I'm not sure I'm an entrepreneur. I think I'm somebody just that has a very low boredom threshold. um, Mental toughness is about, again, I've given an example where I think we all encounter situations, and I'm not talking to you today as somebody who's achieved any more or any less than anyone else. We all have our challenges in life. I think there is a general perception, you've come across this, I'm sure, where people on the outside look at somebody who is inverted commas successful, whatever they deem success to be, and they'll say things like, "Oh yeah, he or she was really lucky," or "Yeah, they were just in the right place at the right time." And there's a bunch of reasons why somebody did something that was more impressive than us. So the first thing to say is we all have those really dark moments in life where we think, can't go on. I want to quit. I don't want to do any more of this. It's painful. It's tough. If you can find a way to get past the little voice, to get through the discouragement club, and do something irrespective of the way you consciously feel about it, that's mental toughness. And I think the only way to become mentally tough is through repetition, is learning the art of mental toughness, going through that process, because you can't just switch it on and switch it off. You are either mentally tough or you're not mentally tough, but you can learn to be mentally tough, like you can learn pretty much anything. And we've got lots of examples we've already spoken about where we've demonstrated, all of us, I don't care who's listening to this podcast, whether you're just starting out on the road in life or whether, you're 40 years in and thinking too late for me. It absolutely isn't. Mental toughness it's a choice, but it's a learned process, I think. Steve Redgrave is a great example. Trained on Christmas, when asked, what got you all your gold medals? And he said, I was the only one that ever trained on Christmas Day. He didn't say, I'm physically built differently. I've got more experience. I'm in a better boat. It was finding something, that extra bit of discipline, because he didn't want the pain of regret. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and you're very right when you say about the fact that mental toughness can be learned and can be developed, because I suppose it goes back to the points you mentioned earlier about some of the goals that you actually set yourself. That is going to help you go on to develop your mental toughness. If you set the bar too low, or you focus solely on the outcome, it's going to have a great impact in that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, going back to yourself though. So I'm guessing on your journey with spinning your five hats there, you've had a few challenges to deal with. Would you like to share with the listeners some of those challenges and how you've overcome them?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind sharing the fact that my father passed away when I was very young. I was 9 years old. My father was 21 years older than my mother. She was a widow at 29 with 4 children. I was the eldest of the four. And I guess it probably had been determined that I would have taken over my father's business, which was in catering, restaurant business. And it would be fair to say, David, he was a pretty successful guy. We lived in a big house, didn't want for very much, had a couple of nice family holidays. But within a couple of years of his death from lung cancer, my mum lost everything. She lost everything because, interestingly, here's another kind of paradigm being a belief system that has no basis for reality. Financial advisors, lawyers, accountants would look at my father and think very entrepreneurial, very successful. He must already be getting advice from someone. And it was a classic paradigm because, of course, everyone was thinking the same way. So nobody did anything. And my mum lost everything. Didn't have any business experience, 4 young children, living in a house she couldn't afford. And we ended up in a council house, lived there happily, all squeezed in, 4 kids. My mum then remarried 4 years later, a wonderful guy by the name of Dave. And he became really the influence in my life. And throughout my teenage years, he was the one who always said to me, just be the best version of yourself. If you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of every day and ask yourself one fundamental question, have I given today my best shot? Have I been the best version of myself? If the answer is no, what changes do I need to make tomorrow better? And if the answer is yes, it's a big thumbs up, it's a pat on the back, and you move forward. When I came into financial services for no other reason than to pay off my overdraft, as I explained earlier, Dave, obviously, who'd become my best friend in the world, my teacher, my wise old owl, he was an amazing influence to me. Basically said, you can be anything you want to be. You just got to have the courage to believe you can be it. And, obviously, in my line of work, he was my number one prospect. When I wrote my list down of all the people I was going to contact to talk about financial planning, Dave was number one on the list, of course. And yet, for 2 years, between 1989 and 1991, I did the classic procrastination, stick my head in the sand, thought of 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't speak to him about insurance, because although he was the breadwinner, we didn't have very much money. We were still living in a council house. And I just kept kicking the can down the road. It was just easier to make an excuse than kind of find the words. And I don't remember actually in December 1991 what I said to him at the time. I garbled some incoherent message around, I'm sure the answer will be no, but it would be remiss of me not to at least speak to you. And then to my surprise, he said, yeah, okay, this is something that I'm sure is important. If anything happens to me, your mum's in the same position all over again. Long story short, we got some insurance cover in place. It wasn't very much because he couldn't afford very much. But just within a few months of him taking out that insurance policy, he was also diagnosed with cancer, stomach cancer, which was very, very aggressive. And he passed away just a few weeks after his diagnosis. But when I was alone by his bedside in hospital, the very, very last thing he ever said to me, and he'd been unconscious for a couple of days, he opened his eyes all of a sudden, he held my hand, squeezed it really tight, and he said to me, "Son, thank you for what you did for your family. I'm so proud of you." And that, in that moment, David, it was like an epiphany. It was like a light bulb that came on for me. And I realized then he handed me something like a real gift. And that gift was this message that the measure of success is not what you say you will do, but what you do. We've all got goals in life. We always talk about the things we're going to do. And I learned very quickly that, an intention is not going to determine success. It is about the action that you take. And that really resonated with me. And that kind of message has carried me through everything else I do. And, okay, I trip up loads of times because I'm a doer. But I've learned that by doing things, I don't carry any regret. And to that mental toughness point, it is the mistakes you make that help you learn and become mentally tougher, because that experience helps you to deal with the next event. Life is not perfect. Success is not linear. There are, a number of bumps along the way, obstacles, but every successful person I know has found a way to deal with those obstacles. And that's the differentiator.
Very much so. It was a really powerful message what you just sent out there. Yeah, I'm sorry for your losses as well. Could we look to wrap things up? You've shared some amazing insights. Would you be able to bring it down into three small takeaways for the listeners?
Sure. I think number one, I call them mind changes, the goal cards. I think transferring conscious thought to subconscious thought is absolutely the number one, because I do believe you can train yourself to be successful, whatever success means. The second one would be to focus on the process, not on the outcome. I think too many of us worry about the end game instead of worrying about the steps we need to take to get there. The end game will always take care of itself if you get the process right. And then I think the third one is make this decision. If you're currently a member of the discouragement club, you've got to agree to quit the discouragement club. And if you're not currently a member, you've got to agree never to join. And I think as long as you stay away from the naysayers, the discouragement club, the people who give you good reasons not to do something, you're probably half the way to achieving whatever it is you want to achieve. And I think I'd wrap this up with one kind of overarching comment. Every single person listening to this podcast is brilliant. They've proven it in many, many different ways. And I don't accept when people say, oh, my circumstances are different. I don't have the same academic qualifications. I don't have the same background or experience or I've only been in business 5 minutes. We have already proven multiple times how great we are as human beings. We just have to rediscover, go through that process, one foot in front of another, maintain a little bit of balance, and we'll achieve those outcomes again.
That's fantastic. I love your positivity there, Sandro. Whereabouts can the listeners find you should they want to have a conversation with you?
Really easy to find. There's lots of videos on all of these different topics on YouTube. So just Sandro Forte. There's fortunately not many Sandro Fortes around. The Sandro Forte podcast on iTunes and Spotify. And then my website is www.sandroforte.com. So on all the social media channels, I'm Sandro Forte, apart from Instagram, where I'm the real Sandro Forte because somebody stole my name a few years ago.
Brilliant. I'll pop all those details in the show notes, and it's been fantastic to chat with you today. Thank you.
You too, David. Thanks for having me on your show.
I recorded this conversation with Sandro before Christmas and thoroughly enjoyed my time with Sandro, and I really do sincerely hope that his thoughts and insights have inspired you to get your pen and paper out and to make sure that your goals for 2024 are written down. That certainly would be my advice too. And better still, once you've written them down, I'd like you to also consider what are some of the potential challenges and obstacles that you might face along the way. So that's right, get that pen and paper out and write down some of these obstacles and challenges that you're likely to come across. And then consider how you're going to deal with them. Certainly in my work, when working with athletes, I find that this approach is hugely helpful, and that the high achieving athletes, well, they want to embrace these setbacks, these challenges. They're not frightened to think about those, and they're not frightened about looking at any failures. If anything, they want to be proactive. They want to make sure that when these things do happen, and yes, they do happen to us all, they're prepared for it. So, a few little ideas there from myself, and I sincerely hope that your start to 2024 gets off to a flyer. To help yourself with this, please do sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter, which I send out currently on a fortnightly basis. It's also going to give you many tips and tricks to be able to ensure that the new year ahead is a good one. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk